Hello and welcome to another video from EarnPED.com. I'm Stevie B. Happy to have you all with us today. Oh, there you are. Didn't see you there staring at my squid mask. So today we are on Next Island. Just got back after making a loop. I hit Monria, I hit Cali, I hit some other places, and I came back because I'm going to bang out some videos today. And then I'm going to be headed back to Cali, and I will be on Cali pretty much for the next month or so. I've got to gear up for Halloween Mayhem. I've got a couple of last-minute preparations to make over the next week or two, and then I will be dealing with Halloween Mayhem nonstop. And then after Halloween Mayhem is over, circa the middle of November, I will be heading to Cyrene, Rocktropia, Arcadia, Tulum again, and a couple of other places. But today I want to get some videos banged out here for October, and let's just get right into it. So today I have a little bit of an interesting / unique video. This is going to be more of a sit down and pull out your pen and paper to take notes on the classroom of economics moment than it is gameplay moment, but the two are going to coincide. So what I want to look at is, if you will notice, I brought some advanced metal extractors and some basic metal extractors for us to look at today. Now, most of you are probably like, okay, extractors, right? Well, we can pull up a markup chart. Most of us know how to do this. On the basic metal extractors, we see markup of 240 to 500%. Well, that is a very large gap. That's a very big difference in magnitude. Let's go ahead and pin that. Also, you may not know this, but if you hit this little button right here, this little pin, it'll pin the window and it will allow you to open another window to compare it to. So let's look at the advanced metal extractor, and let's go to market value there. And what we will see is, again, a fairly big gap, 347% markup to 653% markup. And these markups are not only skewed in magnitude, they're also skewed in actuality. We'll get to that in a moment. So, first of all, there's something very, very important, and I've covered this in other videos in the past, but I want to cover it in today's video because I can't seem to cover it enough because it doesn't seem to sink in for most players. I think most of the people who watch my videos are capable of picking up on this very easily. However, for some reason, most players are not. There is more information in this window than just this percentage right here. I know that's shocking, right? But let's look at what other information we have. So first of all, if we look at the bottom of the window, what does it say? Based on official auction data. So this means that these numbers in these windows are coming from the in-game auction. These numbers and this data in these windows do not take player-to-player trades into account. They can't. There would be no way to. I mean, I guess from a programming standpoint, strictly speaking, you probably could, but that would be extremely cumbersome to do and put a lot of server strain. So the easiest way that they could make this was just to look at what happens on auction, because what happens on auction should be a fairly good representation, most of the time, in a free market system, of what's going on in the larger economy in those player-to-player trades. Now, most people are of the belief that in a free market system, the markets are efficient. I am a very strong believer that markets are extremely inefficient. And the reason I say this is because I take advantage of inefficiencies in markets, in games, all the time. When I say games, I'm not talking about like strictly MMORPGs or video games. I'm talking blackjack, things I consider a game, like search engine optimization. It's any kind of a system, any kind of a structured system that is built to do something specific where I can find an inefficiency. I found this on sales channels before, where there's wholesale and retail salespeople that are vying for opportunities, and there's actually a skew there, and you can take advantage of that. So when I say system or market, I'm talking about any constructed system meant to function in a certain way, right? So most people think that markets are efficient. I do not believe they are efficient. I believe generally they are efficient most of the time, 99.999% of the time. However, a better way to put it would be to put that markets are generally speaking efficient. However, there are opportunistic inefficiencies if you get lucky and know what you're doing and where to look. That would be a better way to put it, I guess. So that being said, I found one such of those opportunities of inefficiency in the market the other day, and it has to do with these two charts right here. So the first thing I want to do is note that there's more than just that this comes from auction. There's more than just this percentage. There's more than just the period over here. Everybody seems to forget this column over here. This column where it says sales. Markup is great, but sales is equally important. In fact, sales is generally speaking more important. So reason being is if I'm willing to pay you 1,000,000,000% markup on 0 sales, what are you making? Nothing. Right? 0 times 1,000,000,000 is still 0. Now, on the other hand, if you've got 1,000,000,000 sales annually and a 1% markup, you're still making a considerable amount of money, assuming no expenses. So the sales is equally as important as the markup. Well, if we look, what we see is this year, for the basic metal extractor, the average for the year has a markup of 544.97%. As far as the quantity that has been sold, the total quantity sold on auction this year has been 162.76 PED TT value. We can see that in the past month, 94.59 PED TT value has been sold at an average markup of 365.79, and we can see that this week, 22.86 PED TT value was sold at 240.59%. So what we can see is generally for the year, there's a much higher markup. But this month, the markup was a little bit lower, with well over half of the year's supply being bought up in the past month. And over the past week, it was a much lower markup still. However, again, there was 25% of the month's total supply bought up this week. If we look over here at the advanced metal extractors, looking at the advanced column, what we see is, again, year average markup 653.8. Again, similar to the first one, total supply 137.35 PED TT, so similar number. Then we see that this month the markup was down this month a little bit, and again we see that the majority of this year's supply, well over half of it, was bought in the past month alone, 88.15 PED. And then we see that again the same thing happened this week, that 347.27%, a very, very low markup, almost half. But what do we see? The supply is horrendous. The supply is almost 75% of the month's supply. In fact, it's a solid almost 40% of the year's supply was bought up this week. So what happened? Stevie happened. That's what happened. So this 22.86 PED TT value that went for 240.59%, that was me. All of it, literally the whole thing. This 57.88 PED TT value that went for a 347.27% markup, that was me. Literally all of it, the entire thing, the whole 57.88 PED. So, let me explain what it did to the charts. The advanced metal extractors, actually the true year markup is closer to 1,000%. The month markup is closer to 750%. However, when I got my hands on a huge amount, 57 PED worth of these extractors for 350%, I was able to buy such a massive volume of the extractors at such a low markup that I tanked the month and year numbers. I essentially was able to buy such a huge supply at such a cheap price, I was able to absolutely tank the markup charts. So the advanced metal extractor should be closer to 1,000% for the year, 750% for the month. But again, I was able to buy up such a huge supply. I bought up almost 40% of all of the advanced extractors. In fact, before my purchase, this number down here, where it says 137, was actually 88. It was like 88, 89. You had to add in my 57 to get it to 137. So prior to me making my purchase, the entire amount of advanced metal extractors purchased in the past year on auction was only about 88, 89 PED. I purchased 57 PED, which then made it 137. So if we look at the pre-purchase numbers, I essentially made a purchase that was the equivalent of 75% of the entire demand for the entire year. Same thing happened over here. You have to take my 22 PED purchase out of these two numbers. So prior to my purchase, these numbers were closer to, I believe, like 700% and like 580, something like that. But this supply number over here was only 140. This 94 was only like 72. It wasn't until I made the purchase of 22 more PED worth that the basic extractors went up to 94 and 162 on the supply side. And when I did, because I got them cheap enough, it literally tanked the charts. Now, why? Why was that possible? Why was that even something that could be done? How was that conceivable that that would happen? Well, let me ask you something. When you're looking on auction, how often are you looking at extractors? I'm going to guess not very often. Most people get on auction, they want to look at armor or skill implants, or they're looking for weapons or amps. Most people aren't looking at the extractors, right? And even if you saw advanced metal extractor, are you really interested in it? Do you have any idea what it's done, what it's used for, why you would even need it? Probably not. So even if you saw it, would you know right off the top of your head if 150% markup was good markup? Probably not without looking at a chart, right? Well, what ended up happening is somebody put a ginormous batch of basic metal extractors and advanced metal extractors on auction. 22 PED, that was like 25% of what this game needs in an entire year. 57 PED of the advanced was somewhere in the area of like 65-70% of what this game needs in an entire year. So honestly, it would be really surprising under most circumstances at the right markups. Those probably would not have sold. Most people would not have spent the money because they would have been like, oh, I'm just going to have to end up TTing it all because I'm going to have to sell it in really small batches. It would take forever. It would just be more pain than it's worth. However, I had a very specific use in mind for both of these extractors. That use is specifically here on Next Island. And in my case, it actually is beneficial for me to own the vast majority of the demand. It's if I can get enough supply that the supply is large enough to be a huge portion of the demand, that is highly advantageous for me. Well, I got lucky. I was on Monria. I wasn't even on Next Island. And I happened to get on auction because I was looking for a specific blueprint that I needed. It was a limited blueprint I need for the upcoming Halloween Mayhem. And when I was there, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to see if anybody's got a good deal on advanced metal extractors and basic metal extractors. How often do you do that, right? So I pulled it up, and somebody had put these two huge batches up, and they just started the bidding at TT value. Well, somebody had seen that it started at TT value, and they placed one bid, and that was it. Well, these auctions were about to end in about 2 to 3 hours from the time I saw it. So I knew right away there was a great opportunity here that I'd been looking for that really was kind of a fluke because nobody in their right mind would put up that many extractors. The odds of it selling would normally not be very good. So I waited, and sure enough, as the auction started to end, I bid, and there was one person that was dumb enough to keep bidding into me. And I say dumb enough because I almost let them win both auctions. Actually, had they placed one more bid on each of the auctions, I was just going to get up and leave my chair and go do something. I actually got up, and I went outside, and I did something for about 10 minutes after I placed my last bid. Because at that point, if they bid back into me, I was just going to let them have it because they would have nothing to do with it. If they turned around and tried to sell it on auction, they would have been completely out of luck. What they were seeing was this huge 1,000% markup number over here, this 750% markup number over here, and the bidding had started off, I think we were at like 105 when I placed my bid, 105%. So they thought that they had this massive profit margin. Well, they had the massive profit margin. What they did not have was a massive profit demand. What they did not understand, as most people in the game do, is this demand number over here, this sales number. We were buying such a large quantity at 22 PED and 57 PED that it was the vast amount of the demand for an entire year, meaning that in an entire year you would have been lucky to unload this many of these extractors, and you would have had to do it piece by piece by piece. It would be very painstaking. So I knew what would end up happening is if they won, they would realize very quickly that they had made a horrible purchase, and they would just end up TTing it. Now the problem is that doesn't help me. So luckily, when I placed my last bid and I got up and went outside, I came back in like 10 minutes later and I'd won both auctions. Oh, cool. Well, yes, I had paid 240% for the basics because the markup is actually closer to 600, 700% on the basics. I had paid 347 on the advanced because the markup on the advanced is actually closer to 1,000%. And that has to do with why I wanted them, but there's also a very specific reason I wanted them in this massive amount of quantity. This now gives me the vast amount of the supply in-game according to the demand charts. I don't think many people would have stacks that big. I think most people in their right minds would probably just TT stacks that big or put a very, very small portion up for sale and piece it out little at a time. I, however, have an advantageous opportunity here on Next Island by having stacks that big. So this is a really, really good lesson in looking at more than just the numbers, because the numbers are skewed very, very far to the low end because I got such a good deal, because there was nobody else really bidding against me except for this one person, and this one person clearly didn't have a clue. I was actually thinking about private messaging them and being like, do you actually understand how to read the sales number over here? Do you actually understand the quantity you're purchasing? Because if you're trying to resell this, you're out of luck. I almost thought about it, but I was like, no, I'll just let their stupidity win. So that being said, these sales numbers are extremely, extremely important. Now, I was an informed buyer. I knew I was buying a huge quantity. I knew I was buying enough that it was going to be a vast chunk of the ongoing demand for the past year. I was very aware of that. I did that very intentionally. However, I see players again and again, they do this accidentally. They find something that they think is a good deal because of the price. They're looking at what they're paying versus what the numbers over here are, but they're not failing to realize there's little to no demand. It's zero pec all the way down, and maybe there was one that sold a decade ago for 9 billion%. Well, just because they can get it for 500%, they think they're going to make a fortune, when in reality it's now a useless item. We see that all the time. I also see players who, because they see these numbers, they go, oh, well, the demand must be dropping. We have sales dropping off. We've got the percentages dropping off. No, in this case, we just had one player, a.k.a. Stevie, who was able to buy up such a huge quantity at such a low price because nobody else was bidding against him, because either they weren't on or they didn't see it. This happened at a very weird time of day. This happened at a weird time of day when very, very few people would be online, I would imagine. Almost the entire world would have been asleep. It was just one of those weird times of day that unless you were in the middle of the ocean, you were highly unlikely to be awake. But because I got such a huge quantity at such a low price, it essentially tanked the markups on the charts. Now, I know these markups will recover. I don't think they're going to just pop back up to 1,000% tomorrow. I think there's people who have been paying 1,000% over here and 750% over here that are going to probably get some pretty good deals over the coming week and a half, 2 weeks. But I do believe they'll recover just because of the rarity of the items and because of how the intricacies of the games and the mechanics work. So I'm not really worried that I've shot myself in the foot because, again, my point was not to buy these to resell. If my point was to buy these to resell, actually making the purchase would have been a horrible idea because I was able to tank the chart so badly. So a lot of people would go, well, isn't this market manipulation? Well, no, not at all. Because, again, I didn't buy these to resell. I might resell small quantities later on. I bought them for a specific purpose we'll get to in the next video. However, this is a good example of how the game's mechanics manipulate themselves because people do not understand that sales volume is equally as important as margin number over here. Everybody looks at the markup. They look at the margin. Nobody looks at the volume. It's like a stock trader. If you're looking at a stock and you want to buy it or you want to short it or you want to trade options on it, what's one of the first things you want to do? You don't necessarily even look at the price right away. First thing you want to do is you want to look at volume, right? Penny stocks. Every penny stock ever touted. What is the key to penny stock pump and dumps? Volume. Penny stocks trade off very, very low volume. So if it's got low to no volume and people are able to pump the number all the way through the roof, and then somebody who has a huge amount is able to dump it back onto the market and suddenly increase the volume through the roof, what happens to the price? Price collapses, right? Same principle that we deal with in the stock market every single day. So had this buyer that was trying to bid against me actually been in the know and understood the sales volume part of the chart, they would not have dared bid against me as much as they did. I would have gotten both of these for well under 200%. However, given what I'm going to be using them for, I'm perfectly happy with my purchase. 240 and 347 is more than fine with me, because again, the true value here is closer to 750% and closer to 1,000%. But I want to put that out there again because we talk so much about markup in this game. And when we talk about markup, everybody's always talking about percentages. And that's fine. That's great. That's understandable. But there is this volume part, this supply part, this sales part that gives you the true picture of demand that the in-game economy has, that is just as important, if not arguably more important, than the percentage. So remember that, because this is super, super, super incredibly important, especially when you're going through determining what you should TT and what you should hang on to. When people are trying to take advantage of you and saying, oh, this is a rare one-of-a-kind item, it sold, 8 years ago for X percentage. Okay, well, is the value truly there? If the value is truly there, there should be some amount of demand. If there's no demand, if there's no sales, that really makes me question the markup. When there's huge markup and very little to no demand, the first thing I do is go, why is that? If there's such huge markup, if this thing seems like it would be in demand, but there's little to no sales, why? Is it truly that rare? Is it no longer useful? Was it useful for a specific thing, like a one-time event that happened years ago? Whenever I see huge markups, which would indicate extreme amounts of demand, because this is what people are willing to pay, and I see little to no volume, little to no sales, all the red flags should start going off in your head, and you should start going, why? Why is there no sales if there should be people willing to pay good money for it? This is also a good example of how somebody making one good purchase, getting one good deal on the in-game auction, if they do it to a large enough extent, can really skew the numbers. I know there's a lot of people that have been selling this stuff on auction. They're probably not happy with me making these purchases because of how I tank the numbers, but the numbers will come back. It's a temporary tank. You do not see this with stuff like Listerium, because there's just such a massive amount of Listerium, thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of PED worth that sells every single day. It would be impossible to do that kind of a thing. However, given how unique of an opportunity it was, because of how drastically it changed the actual markups and the actual percentages, I wanted you guys to see one good purchase, if done to a large enough extent to make up a large enough portion of the sales, can drastically alter the charts. So that being said, the big takeaway is when you're doing your trades, when you're doing things on auction, when you're making your purchases, when you're doing your research, when you're looking at these charts, look at more than just the percentage for markup. Look at this sales category. How much demand is there really for this item? How much TT value has actually been sold on auction in the past week, in the past month, in the past year? And use that information in your analysis. So I'm going to leave it there for today. This video did run a little bit longer than I wanted. In the next video, we will get to actually doing something with those extractors, and then you guys will get to actually see why I am such a fan of getting this great deal and kind of what my plan is moving forward. So for now, sip, sip, smack, smack, y'all know the rest. Hit that bell icon to subscribe to the channel and be notified every time that we put out new content. We really appreciate every single subscriber out there. Also, be sure and hit that like button, because there's always a hater hitting the dislike button. And head over to EarnPED.com, because when you earn, we earn. That is by far the best way you guys can help support us. Till then, sip, sip, smack, smack. Y'all know the rest. Take care, Stevies.